We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they're controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us fight to be slaves. And everybody's just walking around, head in the clouds, and wanna wake up to a dead in the grave. But then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days. Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government released.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That is Top Lobster, who is too retarded to stop.
I hate it. Stop it.
No, it doesn't sound good. We're going back the other way. Before we get into today's guest, guys.
We do the whole thing.
No, I'm not gonna do it. Okay, we're starting.
We're
doing it right now from where we are. Before we get into today's guest, guys, don't forget to. Oh, this. I forgot. You ruined me, dude. This is all your fault. This is only going to be a 30-minute preview, guys. And then we're going to cut the stream and go exclusively to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad for editing purposes. Got to cut in some ads as well as touch up some audio. If you want to continue listening along, you can do so over at patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad, where we can even pull up your chats and all of that good stuff. You guys can interact with us there. Otherwise, just give it a few days and it'll release in its entirety for free. And also a quick announcement. Don't forget to go over to toplobster.com. The Dangerous Retards holsters are officially on sale at toplobster.com, and they are moving fast. People really love them. Who'da thunk it? It's one of my favorite things that we've done so far. Look at that. That's beautiful. And they are available over at toplobster.com, as well as all sorts of other Nephilim Death Squad goodies. But we have teamed up with Snappy Holsters to get you a quality holster with a really cool design. Speaking of cool designs, how about Too Retarded to Stop? Epstein Didn't Kill Himself. Even the revamped Dangerous Retards design is out there because I guess nobody wanted to wear our faces on their chest. Respect.
I like that. I feel like I could just pull up anything on the screen and make David vamp. Like, just make him explain. Just pull up gay porn and he's just like, well, here we have two guys having sex. Like, hey, man, go there. Don't forget the Patreon.
It's the perks of schizophrenia. I have multiple voices feeding me information at any given time. Today's guest, guys, a long time coming. I did his show recently, but it's been a while that we've been planning to have him on our show. We have Joel Santana of the Greypilled podcast is joining us today. Jules, for the audience who might not be familiar with you, brother, let them know where they can find your work and what it is that you focus on.
Yeah, man. It's funny that you call me Joel Santana. That's what all the blacks call me here in my city.
Shout out to Joel Santana.
Yeah, shout out to Joel. I'm Jules. I have the Greypilled podcast. Been going now for about almost a year. February 2nd will be my 1-year anniversary of the show. I actually do a few shows. So I have the main show, which is just Greypilled. I kind of alternate weeks. 1 week I'll have a couple guests on for, kind of like a swap cast or an interview, kind of like what we're doing. Or I'll do a deep dive of some sorts, like in some kind of esoteric kind of review of a book, or and then I do on my alternate weekends, I do other live streams where I kind of kick it with the chat. We watch videos. We get into some conspiratorial stuff. I have Cryptid Watch, me and Conspiracy Extremists, every other Sunday. It's another show that I do where we fuck around, just watch cryptid videos, have a good time. I have a few more shows. I produce for Already Dead every Tuesday night with Jose and Austin.
Shout out Jose Alison in Austin. It's a great show.
Yes. And I'm not too familiar with the parapolitical realm, so it's cool to kind of hear them talk about it, and I learn a thing or two, and then I relate that to stuff that I have been researching for years. I also have a show with the Paranoid American called Sound Science, which we had Toad on recently. That was fun.
Sorry.
No, dude, look, his knowledge of music is very vast. So I was very impressed. And
Is it really?
yeah, dude. Yeah. He was like, "Oh, I know that band. I'm like, "Holy shit, dude. You're a
That's
lot
interesting.
cooler
He's
than I
kind of like
thought."
a Rain Man of music.
Well, technically,
Yes.
he doesn't. He doesn't know shit technically, but he does know a lot of music. Like he's always going to see a different band that I've never heard of.
Always.
So
Yeah.
kudos to Toad. Toad is the man. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
We
That's
can't stop
interesting.
talking about Toad on no matter what show we go on.
It's Toad's
He
year.
follows
Is it
you
the year of the
everywhere.
frog? Because I think it has to be. He's going to
Is
find
it?
a lot of success this year. Jules, I've been watching you, and I know you said that you're coming up on the year in February, which congratulations. That's right around the corner. That's awesome. It's a big milestone. If you look
is.
up the percentage of podcasts that make it to the year mark, it's very far and few in between. The vast majority don't. And so that's a big thing that you're heading up towards. But not only have you been doing this for a year, you've also been mighty prolific. I mean, there's not a lot of people that are creating the amount of content that you're creating. And I do believe that within this space, content is king. But if you can take it a step further and actually show people something compelling, something interesting, then you really got a good formula for success. And you're covering a lot of things that are parallel, overlapping, lots of Nephilim shit. And you're hanging out with so many of our favorite people. I think success is on its way for you. But I want to ask, before we jump into kind of the meat of the conversation, how'd you get here, dude? Like, that's always to me interesting. The Nephilim shit space is like, what led you here?
Well, I got clean back in 2018 off of drugs, right?
Okay.
Off opiates. I'm pretty open about it, led me to having a spiritual connection with Christ, because I was an atheist most of my life, and had a couple experiences where I almost lost my life. And once you start to walk with that Holy Spirit, you start to kind of see good things happen, right? It starts to manifest in your everyday life. So that drew me closer to realizing that, holy shit, the realm that we live in is fucked, and the people running it are doing very dark things on a large scale, and they have been for thousands of years. And so that led me to kind of read some, not only the Bible, but other ancient texts. And this led me to my research on basically fallen angel lineages, different pantheons, how they're all related to these same core, I guess you could say, entities, deities, beings, however you want to look at it. There's many ways to interpret it. And that I was going to mention my favorite show that I do with my co-host Adrian West, Elohim Etymology, which I haven't done one in a couple months. He does video production and stuff for a whole bunch of concerts. So he's been kind of traveling, but we have a lot of good stuff coming. But years of researching stuff and going down these dark rabbit holes, if you don't talk about it, you will kind of start to go crazy a little bit, right? Yes. And I'm at the same time driving my wife completely insane. Which, I mean, she may deserve it because she's the one that got me into it,
Did she really?
Yeah, dude. So we've known each other since we were 12 or 13. We used to go to punk rock shows and stuff. I used to play in a band, and so we started dating. Then she got pregnant with our son, and we got married, and that was 11 years ago. And back in 2012, she showed me Bohemian Grove, and she was like, "Yeah, these are all the world leaders sacrificing children in the woods up in California." I was like, "Oh, holy shit! This can't be real." Little did I know it was real, and not only is it real, it goes a lot deeper than that. And I found that out, and so man, just years of researching this stuff led me to where she was like, "Hey, you should talk about this stuff. You
Wow.
Yeah, you have knowledge on a lot of it, and I don't want you talking my head off about it." And so
that's a good idea.
Yeah, you should.
Bought you a mic. He's like, tell somebody else.
Yeah, that's exactly
so,
what that is. It was her own saving grace. Look, I mean, Top and I are in the same space, right? I'm sure both of our wives don't want to hear about it anymore, but
I can't stop talking about Jamaica. My wife is just like, okay.
Which one does she prefer? She rather you talk about the Nephilim or Jamaica, or is it really all kind of the same thing?
It's the same thing.
Big cross section.
Am I going to go back? I would go back. Honestly, like a Dangerous Retards cruise to Jamaica would be a lot of fun. But I'm not going back by myself.
The English did it at one point, right? I mean, we could probably do it.
I think we could do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a couple of sticks, and you really need to outsmart them. It's not hard.
That's
to do,
all.
But this is
not hard. Yeah.
I don't want to get started on Jamaica again.
Please don't get me started on Jamaica. Okay, so I do have one more question before we get started. I know we came here because you do a great job of unpacking kind of this like Sumerian connection. I've heard you talk at length about Enki and Enlil and who those characters actually are and how they connect to the bigger picture. And I'd be really interested in having that conversation today. But you do a show called Cryptid Watch, which is a lot of fun in concept, right?
Yes.
On my show, Timeline Cleanse, we mostly watch street fights. And
Can I kind of like bring this show in a weird place really quickly?
Please. Of course. Yeah.
Just a little bit of a cryptid watch before we get into this. But this is a video that I just put up on my Twitter, and I really think that it would be interesting for you to watch. Now, this is if you have children watching at home or listening, I guess you can pause it here because it does get a little bit adult, but I think it's funny and it's very topical. So check this video out.
Oh yeah.
Isn't your average gaming controller. This is the Mission 2, and it's a toy by Levins that actually has a suction cup at the bottom.
Stay with me, people.
Not only can you use it for personal play, you can also use it for gaming.
That's a very hard level, Fate.
This game is a lot like Flappy Bird, but with a very specific connection. You can use the Mission 2
$259, it's a deal.
To control your character. So
by the way,
up
always
and
like,
down.
why are morbidly obese women so obtuse about their sexual lives?
Okay, so she gets to the point where, well, this game is not so fun, but there are other games, and check this other game out.
Jumpy isn't the only game that you can play with the Mission 2. Levins also has a bunch of other games on their app, and you can also access different types of...
Read that name.
Yeah. Breeders
of the Nephilim.
Holy shit, dude.
Holy shit is right. And it's one of these furries who we've already established uses this. Well, some of them use the name furry, some of them use the name Therion.
Yes.
Which is a derivative of an Aleister Crowley, Jesus, where does that come from? From his Thelemic book, where I think Therion is like the beast
the
that's
book
related
of the
to. Yeah. It's the same thing as the beast in the Book of Revelation.
Okay.
So
Apollyon.
Right. Yeah. One and the same.
The beast of the great abyss. Yeah.
They're calling themselves that as like a term of endearment or something. They're like, oh, I'm not a furry today. I'm a Therion, or I'm this or that, whatever they identify with. And I just find it very interesting that
it's not lost on them, because if you go through like it just so happens that when you piss off a community of people, you will oftentimes find these type of characters. So their profile picture will have like either an anime thing or like a furry thing or something like that. Yeah. And if you click on their page, you're like, oh, what is this person all about? Like, they're talking shit to me. Let's see what they're about. And like very often they will have Nephilim in their handle or something like that. So I don't know if they're really immersed in it, if it's just like a peripheral knowledge somehow, because these things are connected,
it's
right?
Like their game is Flappy Bird. They're like, oh, we figured out we develop a game called Flappy Bird, and then also Breeders of the Nephilim. Like, excuse me, you don't go from I thought we were gonna do. We skipped, cut the fruit. Like, what happened,
Fruit
people?
Ninja. Can we have done Fruit Ninja with the dildo? Would have been cool.
Yeah, I think there's something tied to that, like a familiar spirit, maybe.
Yeah, like a whispering. That's like, so in my opinion, a lot of people that are moving around aren't aware of the ways in which they're being nudged spiritually. So like it's like the idea of the muses, right? Where it's like, where did you come up for this? The idea for this art that you've created. And it's like, well, it came to me in a dream, or I Fappy Bird, what a banger.
Fappy Bird, very funny.
Shout out Zamugman, Z-Man. So I do think that you don't have to be keyed into the entire bigger picture to be inspired to use these elements in your artwork. And then the question is, what's inspiring you?
Well, it also leads to the topic of today, right? It's like ancient Sumerian deities that have an effect on today's religion, and not just religion, but culture, apparently our tech, our dildos, all this stuff. It's all one and the same. It's a through line.
They came for our tech, and I said nothing because I wasn't a tech bro. They came for our dildos, and I said nothing because I was not a dildo bro. Yeah, it is something that permeates the culture, and oftentimes will display itself in the most debaucherous corners of our culture. Things that probably would be better left in the dark, in the shadows, but instead they're at I don't know, what was it, a conference or something like that?
some kind of
It's like
conference,
we're no
the
longer
ABN.
doing things that we're ashamed of in secret. We're doing them and monetizing them.
No, well,
Shout out Timeline Cleanse.
A little background here. I was told that, well, by the guy that we did Bohemian Grove with, he rented out a hall to do a Comic-Con where this kind of stuff would be going on. Like, I've been to some Comic-Cons. It's like, this is what happens. These are the people. And I was like, hey, maybe Bohemian Grove could be in one of these bigger venues. And he was like, oh, I don't know if they'd be okay with you guys, being there. I was like, we didn't, we did a presentation on the Chrome, and we did show a penis on the screen once for 30 seconds or so.
Just once.
I'm like the degeneracy. You see, like I do this kind of like degeneracy to kind of show you, like, hey, I'm married. Yeah, I'm married with 2 kids, and I'm just like, we're just like touching the line of like, this is what's acceptable in society. But when I say it, we're like the outcast. But these people can come in there. It's just
with actual dicks.
Yeah, it's baffling.
Yeah,
it's baffling to me.
Yeah. So okay, this is let's get into the bigger picture here. We just watched Billy Carson get torched in many ways by Wesley Huff.
Shout out Wes Huff. Yeah, man.
Yeah, and he was just on Rogan's podcast. Top and I listened to. It was an excellent podcast. No complaints. Followed by Mel Gibson's appearance on Rogan, which also banger. 2 Christian-centric episodes on the biggest platform in the world. And Wes is coming off of the back of having demolished Billy Carson and really just showing him the many ways in which he's misinterpreting texts, misrepresenting texts, or how the texts that he's referencing are not relevant to the conversation at all. And it was pretty masterfully done. And I don't want to throw sort of the Billy out with the bathwater, in the sense that there is a lot of really compelling information hidden within this Anunnaki narrative, hidden within these Sumerian texts, these characters, the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? All of these various characters seemingly are different names for characters that we are otherwise familiar with within Christianity, or even other mythos like Greek mythology and things of that nature. And so what I like about what you're doing, Jules, is you have this Christian-centric worldview, but you're still looking at these things and trying to see, well, how do they play with this Christian-centric worldview? How might these characters actually be characters that we do know or know of? And is this one of these things where it's 9 truths and 1 very important lie? And so I guess you can sort of take it away, Jules, if you want, with what did you start to discover as you went through these like Sumerian epics?
Well, I think you described it very well when you say, the 9 truths and the 1 lie. When I first got into this stuff, I did watch a lot of Billy Carson. And if you're kind of getting introduced to the Anunnaki or the Elohim, whatever you want to call them, even the Nephilim and stuff, he has some pretty good videos, but he kind of loses the mark where he veers into that, we should be worshiping these deities, or a certain sect of them. One side good, one side bad. I think both sides are bad, just in different ways. And when you look at it, you can kind of relate them to today, like the liberal archetype and the like neocon archetype, right? And so when I started to get into that, and I started to read all these other texts, the Book of Enoch, the Epic of Gilgamesh, like you had said, the Necronomicon, you can start to make comparisons and contrasts between these certain deities, and you realize that, oh my God, they're talking about the same ones in all these stories, just by different names. They usually keep the same archetype, but when I found that connection with Christ, and you did hear him say that all this stuff about Jesus that I don't find to be true. Everyone has their own interpretation, but yeah, man. I mean, he put some good information out there, but you do have to take some of it with a grain of salt. Excuse me. And for instance, the whole space thing, right? Now, I've started to look at this as when folks say that they're spaceships, maybe it's like the Merkaba light bodies, right? Then they're coming out of portals. Maybe they're much more ancient beings that have been here a lot longer than us. But you do start to find similarities with all of these deities. For instance, Enki, right? The first one to fall, in a sense, Samael, who, certain classes of religions look as like a necessary evil, right? You see that a lot in the Kabbalah mysticism. They kind of I don't want to say worship Samael, but he is
venerated.
Yes, very much so. And you kind of see this with Enlil and Enki, this masculine and somewhat feminine side to it. And so Enki, in my opinion, is the Lucifer archetype. And it is what is being brought back right now. And you have all these other deities, and they're all in the same family. And like I said, you can trace this through the stories, such as like Lilith. And I was doing some research earlier today on some stuff that I think we could bring up in a little bit. Y'all start talking about cryptids. I found some pretty interesting stuff that could be related to like Leviathan, Behemoth, these ancient monsters that I think would be pretty cool. But for instance, with like ancient vampires, right? This goes back to Sumeria, known as the wind spirits, or the Lilitu, Lilith, same thing, right? But she is just a granddaughter of both Enki and Enlil, because when you look at these stories, you also see they intermarry a lot, which you see with these elite families, right? And so with each one of these deities, okay, well, I won't put it like that. So with each one of these deities, you can trace them, and you can kind of tell that, especially through symbolism, which ones are being worshipped throughout the ages, which civilization holds which one in the highest regard. It's kind of incredible. But yeah, man. Also, people like to. Another thing that Billy does is, well, I guess not just Billy. There's a lot of people that get into this stuff. Many interpretations, like I said. I don't, and y'all should take what I give you with a grain of salt as well. That there are two sides to it, and that we're kind of being pinned against each other by these sides, right?
Can I just go back again to Samael, because I'm like thinking about what I know about him. So you mentioned Lilith in the same breath as you did Samael, and you're saying that like they're a duality, or are you saying, because some people think that they were married. I don't know if this is I don't even know if it matters, because
okay, so if you look at it in the family tree, she is a granddaughter of both, well, I guess a great granddaughter of Enki and Enlil, because Enki's daughter marries Enlil's son, right? His son being Nanarsin, the moon god, which I believe is the god of Islam. Enki's daughter being what's her name? Name will come to me. Ningal. And them having Utu Shamash, Irish Kagal, who is known as Persephone. Utu Shamash, you can see him in the book of Enoch. He taught the signs of the sun. He's the sun god Helios, Shamsiel. one of the fallen angels. Also, Inanna, Ishtar, what's another name? Astaroth, I think. Venus, which is another form of Lucifer worship, because before there was any, so the original Lucifer worship was really just the worship of Venus or the morning star before it turned into what you would call like an egregore, right? Or like someone taking on that archetype. And so Enki, so Lilith being the great granddaughter of Samael, they still had sexual relations, right? So you do see that with most of these entities, which we know is probably just something you shouldn't do, right? And so, yeah, man, I mean, you see these archetypes manifesting today. But when you go all the way back, now it's the same thing with Marduk. Most people don't know that Enki's son Marduk was the original fallen angel Azazel. And like I said, there's certain religious sects that I guess you could say worship these entities. I don't know if y'all want to get into that.
Well, before we do, can I ask you a question about Enki and Enlil? What characters might we otherwise know them by as far as names go?
Well, Enki, there's a couple older names like in the Akkadian, Assyrian kind of pantheons. Ea, the god of the water. Then you have Nudama, the artful fashioner. And this goes back to him creating hybrid beings, right? And them knowing that like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. They refer to a creator of all, right? So even they know that there is a higher power above them, and they know that they are doing wrong. And they question that quite a lot. So for them to follow through with it, it's kind of like, okay.
Well, Jules, before you go on, I just wanted to say that what this is reminding me of is this same thing that we have playing out today. So when it comes to politics, we unironically identify both political parties as the left wing and the right wing, which is to say two sides of the same entity, right?
Yeah.
Two wings of the same bird, or maybe two wings of the same fallen angel. And then, of course, you have this in Freemasonry too, where people will suspect that much of the theater that we see unfolding on the world stage is a sort of Freemasonic ceremony of sorts, where you're having this left-hand path
and the right-hand path.
And the right-hand path, right? Light magicians, dark magician, and we're meant to root for one, but what do these hands belong to? Well, they're two hands of the same entity, and it isn't lost on me how impactful that modality is on, human beings, to do that, to create this bit of theater, to have them rooting for one side or another when it's really just the same entity. That's some of the most powerful control mechanisms that we're exposed to today. And it would seem only appropriate if I learned that same methodology is one that's been there since the dawn of time. So when you're talking about Enki and Enlil and all these different entities, it almost feels like what you're getting at is that since then, it's been this false binary.
Yes. And you asked for some more kind of comparisons. In Enlil, you could compare him to El, Saturn, Cronus. Enki, you could compare to Poseidon, right? Because Ea, meaning the god of the water. Yeah, man. And then you have like, for instance, the Luciferic archetype, Prometheus, right? You could refer to him as that as well. With Enlil, his son being Ishkur relates a lot to Zeus, right? So you got Cronus, Zeus. So, I mean, and some people will be like, well, Ishkur, he more relates to Saturn and this. And so, I mean, there's many ways you could look at it. But this is my interpretation, right? So I think people should, if they're interested in it further, do maybe their own research and try to find other kind of connections, because you can find out more and more about this stuff the farther you keep going into it. But yeah, man, no,
it is dense. I do recommend people use you to help launch their research, because from the outside looking in, this is a daunting and dense topic, and it's so foreign, even though it's so intrinsic to our experience here in this realm. It's still so foreign, which is obviously by design, right? It's like the very nature of the place that we inhabit is a mystery to us, and so it is daunting to try to understand these things. But I think what you're doing over there at Greypilled Podcast is a great way to help people piece these things together. But I wanted to ask you something. And yes, we are going to cut the stream soon, guys. So for those of you who are watching on Rumble, on YouTube, we're going to be going live exclusively to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad in a matter of moments here for editing purposes. But if you don't mind the audio and you don't want ads, maybe consider signing up at patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. You can continue watching along, sounding off in the chat, and also get a few perks while you're there. So Jules, you had mentioned Samael and how he was perceived as a necessary evil. And that brings to mind this idea of Satan, right? Satan being the accuser. I'm kind of becoming more and more comfortable with this as being a job title, one that's meant to test man in various different ways. And that's why you'll often see Satan communicating with God, asking if he's allowed to do X, Y, and Z to Job, and God is allowing some of it, but not all of it. There are rules to engagement. And it does seem that I'm not sold one way or the other, but I could understand how a character like that would be important to our development spiritually and cognitively, intelligent, just our development. All right. So I'm wondering, is that what you're getting at when you say that people perceived him as a necessary evil?
Yes. Inky was probably, okay, so you're right. It is a title there, and this is in my opinion. There is not one Satan, right? Ha-Satan, Sataniel, whatever you want to call them by. It's a title or an archetype that's passed down, and you see it in these stories passed down through these deities, particularly on Inky's side, right? And so yeah, it basically it passes down from Inky to Marduk, from him to his son Set. And then you have Semyaza thrown in the mix, who's basically one of these lesser angels, where you could consider fallen cherubim, right? And that's a whole story in itself, to be honest with you, because you have certain gods in certain parts of the world being worshipped in these different cultures, but when you look at it from this angle, it's like they're all kind of fighting for power amongst each other, like a family feud of some sort.
Right.
And so, yeah, Inky's side is more of the dualistic kind of. He is the serpent in the garden, right? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and when you look at a lot of them are like the gods of the earth, the gods of the water. Where do serpents roam? On the ground, right? Even with these ancient monsters, you find like lion-faced dragons that they talk about.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's actually something that we were talking about recently, because within the Gnostic belief system, they depict God as it's what's the name of it?
Yaldabaoth.
Yaldabaoth. And I believe that's actually the same entity that Homeboy would have saw in our Jerry Marzinski episode with the mechanical engineer who overcame schizophrenia, but did have a vision of this entity coming out of a portal. So there's no shortage of like serpentine body, lion head kind of situations within this spiritual realm when it comes to these entities.
Yeah, man. And the Gnostic text, dude, that's something else that that you can get into, and you can also kind of relate the aeons, right, which are under the archons, I think, to the fallen angels that came in Genesis 6, right? But most people don't know that there were two falls. But when you look at the Sumerian story, you do find that Inky arrived first, right? But something that I don't really agree with is it's told that he created us.
Right.
Now, I think we were already here, and then they came and they created other races, right? And manipulated DNA, fallen angel DNA tinkering, because it talks about this, and that's how the Nephilim were created, which happened in the second fall when Marduk basically decided, hey, I'm tired of being up here stationed on Mars. Because in the Anunnaki story, let's go ahead and talk about this. Their planet was dying, right?
Right.
Nibiru, which I often look at as another dimension, maybe. Yeah. And so to keep themselves from like aging rapidly, growing tall, or I guess from not growing tall, they had to shoot atomic gold into the atmosphere. And some people have related mana, like, the mana from heaven, to
Yes.
mana atomic. Yeah. There's some of that right there. And they would shoot it into the atmosphere. They grind it up. I trying to remember what it was called. There's another name for it, but maybe it'll come to me. And so they were running out of that, and they basically found that. Well, okay. So the story goes, there was an exiled king of Nibiru who fought King Anu, the father of Enki and Enlil. And I don't know if this was symbolic or not, but he ended up biting off Anu's penis. His manhood. Yeah, so there's these ancient wrestling matches that they used to have to gain kingship over one another. They'd get naked, kind of gay, and they would wrestle each other. And so Alelu, who a lot of researchers have kind of connected him to the face on Mars.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He arrives on Earth, and he basically sends out a message to them. Now, this could be through telepathy. This could be if they had, if you're an ancient being and you have knowledge that's otherworldly or from another dimension, maybe you could create some kind of radio, right?
Okay.
I don't know, some kind of ancient Apple Watch, maybe. I don't know. Basically telling Enki, like, hey, there's gold here on this planet. It's plentiful. And so they arrive, and you see the similarities in all these. Like, you have the Atrahasis, right, which is the flood epic. You have Enki in the World Order, that cuneiform tablet, which is basically the arrival of Samael and his fallen to Earth to mine this gold. And they basically create these lesser Anunnaki called the Ajiji.
Can I ask you something real quick?
Yeah.
So you're saying who showed up first? Enki?
Well, it was this guy, Alelu, whose daughter was married to Enki. So they had some like father-in-law, son-in-law bond, right? So that's why he hit Enki up. He's like, yo, what up? Come on down here,
Right.
And he ends up basically being exiled from Earth to Mars, where he dies. And that's where that supposed face on Mars comes from. That's just a theory, but
I just feel like it's interesting that Elon has this obsession with Mars, right? And I know the book from Werner von Braun and the guy named Elon who's colonizing Mars, but it's Elon, L-on, right?
Yeah. And you look at that with Enki, and it's like starts with the E, 4 letters, right? Like there may be something there. And I talked with Jose about this on his morning show, the Kek deity, right?
Yeah, the Egyptian deity of chaos, the frog deity.
Yeah, which is also related to Osiris, the archetypal green man. I'd say probably the first one, him and Ptah. Ptah also being Enki, right? Who, when you look into what they looked like, they were green. And this is where like Yoda comes from, because of the Jed pillar, the Jed eyes, right? Very interesting stuff, because you see the green man a lot, and people probably like, oh, that's just a frog. But like, you got Kermit, you got Yoda, you got the Grinch. You have a lot of forms of entertainment that you see out there, and they're putting this green man in front of you. And the green man was sacrificed to in a lot of pagan mysteries, right? So you see this throughout time. But Osiris basically being Osiris, he was I guess a child of 2 bloodlines. So when you get further into this, and this is what my co-host Adrian, a lot of his research has come to. One side of the Anunnaki comes from the Orion star cluster, the other coming from Sirius, the dog star. And you see the dog symbolism a lot, especially with the what was it? The Erdemu, which means gruesome hound or howling dog, which I interpret to be the first dog man.
That's where my brain started going.
What was the other star?
Are you talking about the Orion star cluster?
Yeah. What did that represent?
That represented basically Inky side. And through my co-host's research and his co-author, who he writes his books with, shout out Adrian, he basically came to a conclusion that Inky was reptilian. He was born of an egg birth called parthenogenesis, which is basically like an asexual reproduction. Coming from the Pleiadian queen, who was a reptilian, and this is where it gets kind of out there, guys, so stay with me, named Maya, right? Which is, we know that's what the month of May is named after. And she kind of had this royal tie to Anu. Like they had to have a child. Now her just basically having an egg birth because she's a reptilian. If
so
that
she's got a cloaca. Very cool.
Yeah.
How'd that feel?
That cloacy. But you know, they Anu raised Inky. So it like wasn't really his son, but he raised him like his son. So Inky and Enlil weren't brothers, they were stepbrothers. And that's where the clash comes in. One of them's like, I want to rule this. And he's like, no, I'm the son of Anu, like, you know, his actual seed. I'm going to rule. And then their children fight over it.
The Lion King, right?
It does a great job of laying out, like, once again, everything is about genetics. Everything is about a seed.
Yeah. What you do with that seed is on you, you know?
Right.
But
you need to drink it to get the knowledge.
Was that 20%?
So okay, yeah, this is I mean, so much of these things have overlap, and what's really important to highlight here is, like, you know, the only real beef that I have with like a Billy Carson type of character, and like you mentioned earlier, Jules, there's a lot of people who kind of take this route, is that these things are, number one, our creator, and number two, the Bible's wrong. And it's like, I don't even know how you could say that when the overlap is tremendous. It's like, to say the Bible is wrong is to say that the vast majority of your own research that you're championing is wrong, because the overlap, like I said, is tremendous. So, but it does feel like, and I know we're going to get into more, but it just feels like the name of the game is very simple. It's like, there is God, the creator, the father, and then there are these rebellious creations, and what they've done is they've just split themselves into two groups, one good, one bad, and then said that they created us. So now they have us rooting for them, and also they've lied to us fundamentally about the nature of how we came to be.
Yeah, man. And that's why I was saying, like, you kind of have to watch out with this stuff, because there are a lot of people that probably research it and they're like, oh, well, this makes sense, right? They don't dive any further deeper. They don't question it at all. But once I had once you develop that connection with the Holy Spirit, with Christ, whatever you want to call it, Christ consciousness, I don't know. It's something you can't really deny, right?
Yeah.
And so I do take those stories with a grain of salt. However, when you read these other stories, it's like, okay, well, the deities are there. You know, they're all fallen. Regardless, they're all fallen. If you want to worship them, that's on you. But in my opinion, they're all fallen. They're all part of the Ophinum, Seraphim, Cherubim that lost touch with the Creator and rebelled. At the same time, creating offspring who would then create other offspring, and so on and so forth. And so you have these different generations of fallen. And dude, I mean, like I said earlier, many interpretations of these stories, as well as like people like to correlate. For instance, what's a good example? Tammuz, Dumuzi, who is Enki's youngest son. People like to relate him to Nimrod and then to Shamash. That's 3 different deities completely, in my opinion. Nimrod or Gilgamesh being another son of Enki, because one thing you do see in these stories is Enki is sticking his dick into absolutely everything.
Crushing.
Yeah, dude. Like what says he poured his seed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it flowed like the river or something.
This dude just nutting rivers.
Yeah, well, lots of seed. He would find like young women. I don't know how young, so don't, we're not gonna go there. But and yeah, he would just, oh, I like this woman. His like viziers would be like, yes, master, go for it.
There's something that I kind of wanted to go back to. I'm sorry, I know I keep derailing you,
look,
but
I probably started the show off. Y'all asked me to get into it, and I just fucking nosedive right down.
Right. Well, it's
I've
a hard thing to ease yourself into, right? It's such a vast pool of information, so we have to kind of trust that the audience has some sort of grounding, and then take it from there. But
I'm trying to pick my spots of asking questions because
I've had a lot on my mind this morning, and so now I've just kind of dumped it on y'all. So if you need me to go back and talk about anything, if you have any questions about like what deities, I mean, I have. Are we just on Patreon right now?
Right now we're just on Patreon. Yeah.
Well, I have my pantheon journals right here.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah,
man actually takes
dude.
notes. Incredible.
Tons of stuff.
Someone's gonna find that in like 100 years and be like, "What the fuck is this guy talking about?"
Yeah, I'm a
The Book of Jewels. So check this out. You mentioned before 3 things that I think
The
are
Book of
relevant here.
Jewels.
You mentioned Orion, right? And then one sect of these entities coming from there. And then you mentioned Sirius, the other sect coming from there. We also mentioned Nibiru. And this brings into question the idea of like space and the nature of it actually. So going back to Sumer, I believe that they actually had depictions, hieroglyphics of the solar system.
Yeah.
And it was in such a way, this is something I became aware of when I was younger and I was kind of into the whole Anunnaki thing. And that was very striking to me that this ancient civilization would have had an accurate depiction of our solar system. But it did include an additional celestial body that I think now we would have identified as Nibiru, according to their mythology. And so for, I guess, the layman, the idea is that Nibiru was sort of this planet that is on an elliptical orbit, meaning it's not a circle, it's an oval. And its orbit takes thousands of years to complete. And so what happens is
3,600 years.
3,600 years.
It's called one shar. Which ties into a lot. But
right.
Sorry.
So the idea is that this thing spends a time passing through our solar system, causing all kinds of havoc, bringing these entities closer to ours. Obviously, introducing a celestial body into our mix-up will cause all sorts of geomagnetic, pole shifts was kind of the theory, right? We're going to have a magnetic pole shift because of this planet's entry into our proximity. But then on the other end of this 36-year process, it's very far from us. And allegedly it's blocked from our telescopes by our own sun. And then there's all this speculation about what it actually is. Is it a brown dwarf? Do we have a binary star system? Yada, yada, yada. Whatever, doesn't matter. Let's go on to the Orion's Belt thing. You have the Great Pyramids. They are clearly mirroring Orion's Belt. And so it's this megalithic structure that's pointing to this this astrological system. And then of course you have the Sirius thing, right, where these other entities claim to be from. And it starts to beg a lot of questions because we know that NASA lies a lot. And I'm open to the idea that just because, look at ancient Sumerians. How did they know this? How were they able to depict this solar system? Well, they were told. They didn't have the ability to see them themselves. Maybe they were granted some sort of technology, but the name of the game from these entities is deception. So now I'm entertaining the idea, are they deceiving these people? Are they planting these seeds very early in humanity's development so that even the ancient civilizations have an idea of our solar system because I believe that in many ways, NASA is also designed to lie to us about the nature of space so that it can trick us about the nature of the entities. So this is all very complicated. I on one hand, I want to give credence to the ancients' depictions of the stars and how accurate they are. But on the other, I also recognize that NASA is lying, to a grandiose scale. And you said that maybe the idea of Nibiru is actually a portal. So can we talk about that a little bit? I mean, what do you think these things are actually coming from? Do you think they're coming from someplace far away, or is this an interdimensional thing?
Yeah, man. Maybe. Okay. So for instance, you said that 36, well, I had mentioned it was 3,600 years. Here is 1 year on Nibiru. So it says, right? And so maybe there is a portal. Now, it really depends on what you believe. If you believe in, if this is a realm, if this is, a globe Earth with space or flat Earth with a dome, right? They got to be coming from somewhere outside of this dimension, regardless. Now, I don't know, because you see their descriptions in these texts of these winged birds, right? These giant birds that it says they fly in. But like I was saying earlier, this may just be a description of a light body, right? Or an opening. Because when you look a little further on, like in certain depictions, Uranus, you see these pictures of them with these star portals, right? And we've heard about like ancient star portals in Iran, which we know is the Fertile Crescent, old Mesopotamia, which is, there's a theory that that's one of the reasons that we went to war with, with Iraq and all that stuff, because Saddam had star portals there. I think they were trying to bring some of these deities back through. I think these, if these certain entities were here and they left a long time ago, they would come back to check in. If not all, I think there's still some here. A few of them that have been worshipped over the last couple thousand years, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that Christ came. Because there are theories. Now, this is a theory, mind you, that he incarnated earlier on, right, through all these other entities, the Christed beings in all these old mystery schools. But that Jesus Christ was his final incarnation, and that, I think all these other mystery religions maybe kind of copied from the story of Christ. And maybe it's been subverted in some way. Like you said, are they planting seeds from the very beginning to deceive us? I think that could be the case, right? I kind of look more into, I guess, how we are worshiping these deities without even knowing it. Through our stuff, the stuff that folks do every day, which y'all call Nephilim shit, right? Yeah, man, there's a lot of theories, and there's some stuff that I'm still doing research on, that I'm still kind of diving down, making more connections with the Bible. But yeah, dude, I mean, I forgot what I was going to say. Forgive me.
Well, I was going to mention, because of what you were just saying, that, this idea that some of them are left behind still. I mean, throughout the Bible, it seems that like different entities are relegated to different punishments, different places, right? Like there's not just the bottomless pit, right? Or there's not just like the lake of fire. If you read the book of Enoch, it seems that there's multiple places. Even the idea that there are angels underneath the what's that river in Africa that is drying up? It's
Euphrates.
man, why am I losing
Is it
this?
Euphrates?
The Euphrates
Yeah.
River, right? So we already have precedent for a lot of these entities being in different locations, whether they're here on Earth or in our realm or some other place that we don't have access to. But in the Book of Enoch, when the archangels were flying Enoch around, he took note of like several different um, disturbing places that he was asking these angels, like, what in the hell is that place? What's that place? And so uh we have been uncovering here on Nephilim Death Squad this idea that something is going on in Indiana, which there is even books to back that idea. I know they're works of fiction, but I was recently made aware of a book called Angelology that claims that
I've heard of
one
that.
of the places that these entities reside in underground, Nephilim and fallen angels, which is the language that the book uses, is Indiana. And of course, Stranger Things takes place in Indiana. Now, Stranger Things, it happens in a different realm, though, in the Upside Down. And I would argue that many of the experiences people are having in Indiana, where they are meeting Baal, interestingly enough, right, which is an old would. I don't know if Sumer would be the first instance of the usage of the word Baal, but
Yeah,
and I'm also
it
coming
actually
from.
comes
Go
from
ahead.
Bel, which comes from Belu, which means Lord. So Baal would just mean probably like the Lord.
Right, like
And
almost like king, right? Interchangeable with king.
yes.
Yes, and that to me feels a lot like Satan. So Satan being the accuser, Baal being Lord or king. Um, in the same way that there have been many Satans, I imagine there have been many Baals as well. So whoever people are getting recruited by,
Actually, yeah.
it's more or less like he's saying, "Call me king," as a way of identifying himself, this entity. But we don't know which one it is actually, right? As far as like, is it Azazel? Is it X, Y, and Z?
Well, yeah, you actually hit the nail on the head with that one. It is Azazel. Um, when you look at Azazel, he is the first of the second fall. This correlates directly to Enki's oldest son, Marduk. Now, when you look at the Sumerian story, Marduk was cast aside. He was used as the scapegoat, which that's what Azazel means, is the scapegoat.
Oh,
Um, and he basically, this is Bel in the Bible. This is the Bel that you see in Isaiah, whose son is Nabu, right? You see him, he is basically their adversary because, Satan means adversary. He is the adversary of the Anunnaki. He is the one who he kills his youngest brother Tammuz, right? Because he is jealous of him and Inanna's relationship. Now, they shouldn't have had that relationship because they're cousins, right? I mean, if you're into that, you're into that. But yeah, he is kind of put out there as this Satan figure. And you see it with his son Set, with his butt buddy Simyaza or Shamgaz. That was his name in Sumeria. And like I said, folks kind of need to do their own research if they're interested, because my interpretations may be wrong, right? I'm just kind of going on what I know and putting together different texts that I've read. And like, I don't want to lead anyone away from what would be Christ, right? But I have kind of driven myself crazy with this stuff sometimes. That's why my mind goes blank. I have to question a lot,
right.
but there's some things that you just know to be true. And I've said this a lot recently, like, just because folks have read the Bible or they go to church every week doesn't mean that they're in tune with that spirit, right? Most people, well, not, I wouldn't say most, but there's a lot of, especially down here in the South too, with like all the Southern Baptist churches and stuff. Like, there's some people there that are going there just like are shitty, you know.
Right.
We ended up going to a non-denominational church that works out better than anything. But like, they have the flag, they had the Israeli flag up in there, and I'm like, hey, you don't know that's the hexagram of Solomon, right? Like, that was used to build Solomon's temple, which is where Freemasonry stems from.
We had a little bit of that on our show where we were talking to somebody, and it was a great episode up until we speculated as to whether or not the Star of David was really the Seal of Solomon, or or the Star of Remfam, and he didn't like
It'd
that.
be the same
He
thing.
got a little upset at that.
Really?
Yeah,
Lost-
you know, it
lost
is what
his
it is.
shit.
It's
You can
not.
look into Goetia in the Lesser Keys of Solomon and see right there, hey, this is the hexagram of Solomon. This is a hex sign.
Right.
The thing is that by like bringing that up, we are cutting off his entire ideology at the knees. At least his political ideology. It's boomer shit, you know.
It is
So-
boomer shit. Yeah, they really do love that. You know what this reminds me of though, especially this conversation about titles. There's a really famous interview, Bob Dylan, I think, where the interviewer, it's like 60 minutes or something, and the guy's saying, "Why are you still doing this? All these years later, you're so old, you have enough money. Surely you can retire." And I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "Well, it all goes down to that deal that I made, and I've got to make good on my end of the deal." And he goes, "Deal with who?" And he goes, with the, I think he uses the expression commander in chief of this realm and a realm that we can't see, which is interesting because that also goes back to Top. Who were we having a conversation with? Might have been Jay Dyer, talking about a guy who was, for research purposes, delving deep into LSD, I think back in the 70s, and consistently coming in contact with an entity that identified itself as Moloch. This is before Moloch was mainstream conspiracy, you know, especially without the internet back then. That's whispers of an entity, you know, in really strange. I don't even know who's having those conversations back in the 70s and where they're having them at. I would love to be a fly on the wall for what conspiracy theorists used to look like. But and that entity told him that one day he would be the king of, I guess, the West, more or less. And so if Chief is a title, if Baal is a title, if Satan is a title, and there's all these entities that seem to be passing it back and forth, I think that really is an important distinction to draw when looking at, because there's a very reductive point of view. You know, Jules, you're talking about how this is beyond the grasp of a lot of, like, let's say Southern Baptists, right? And so they're not armed with this in-depth information, which I don't think you need to be saved, or I don't think you need to know this in order to be saved. You just have to believe that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and repent, and through him is the Father, right? So it's a simple thing, the belief being the core function here. But there is so much, I guess, not to say that I'm right, but if I am, there's a lot of misunderstanding going on here about the nature of these entities. We have one dude with a pitchfork who's made of red skin, and he's got horns and a flickery tail, right? And that's Satan. And it's like, actually, it's infinitely more complicated than that. And there are a lot of people, there are systems, king, chief, yada, yada, right? Colonel, I don't know, like an army. And why wouldn't there be? Because how are we capable of creating those systems, but these entities wouldn't?
Right. Yeah, dude. Well, funny thing about that with the horns, that does go back to Inky and his whole side being depicted with horns. Now, I don't know if that's just because in the Sumerian lore, you know, they are kind of put, you know, as the serpent or the adversary. And so they are depicted with those horns. It may be symbolic because you have some depictions of Moses with horns, right?
Yeah.
And him coming from Egypt, Egypt being the land of Kim. Where else do we see that word? In alchemy, right? There's theories of Moses being an alchemist, like the first OG alchemist. Now, is that true? I don't know. But I mean, it's something that you could look into. And you see that symbolism a lot. And, you know, guys, that's why I have the Elohim etymology. And each episode is focused on a certain deity, because when you start to talk about all of them, as y'all saw earlier, you kind of like, you're like, oh, shit. Okay. Where am I now?
Right.
But you can see which deities are being worshipped today through the symbolism. A lot of symbolism that these celebrities put out there. Ishtar, for instance, the feminine aspect, Venus, the original Lucifer archetype. And people are like, oh, Lucifer being a female. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah, he was gay.
Dude, with the dualism, you have the feminine and masculine aspects of it as well. Your Eye of Horus, your Eye of Ra. all that stuff. Horus and Ra being grandsons of Enki.
Mhm.
So it says in the Sumerian stuff, and well, Ra relating more to Marduk. I guess you could say Horus and Osiris, as well as Set. But that story in itself. So then when you think about it, you're like, damn, the Egyptians were worshiping just this one sect of the fallen. Now
Right.
there's some interpretations that Yahweh, Jehovah, is Enlil, and the
Right.
archangels are his sons. Now that may not be so bad. So what if they are actually like trying, like they're fighting against Inky, like fucking Earth women and all this stuff. His kids like dabbling in magic and teaching humans all this other stuff. What if they're trying to put a stop to it, and like they are emissaries from the creator, right?
Right.
Because
Just on that point, the way that I've remedied that in my own communications with God is I reference God as the Father that Jesus Christ is talking about specifically, because I've seen enough anecdotal evidence for what you just said, Yahweh being like, this other negative entity, that I'm like, okay,
because he is in the Canaanite pantheon and stuff like that, right? And so maybe Yahweh is like a title, or maybe they've hijacked the name and taken a couple like vowels out, change it around a little bit, because there's a lot of different translations for these names. Yahweh, kind of like with Jesus, Yeshu, Yeshua.
right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like I said, grain of salt, guys.
It's interesting because I with that Bob Dylan interview that you always bring up. So he's talking to Ed Bradley, and the exact quote is, "It goes back to that deal I made with the chief commander in this world and the one we can't see." So he's
Can I just
calling
say
him
my ability
Chief
to
Commander.
paraphrase that was like fucking 95%.
Yeah, you missed Chief Commander, which is
No, I
a
said
big
Chief
one.
Commander.
Oh, you
I
said that?
said it, dude. Fuck yeah. I just didn't say.
Whatever.
I said in this world, in a world we can't see, is what I said.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting though, because it's like you're calling on the Most High, or you're using these names, but he's saying Chief Commander. What the hell does that mean?
Satan
Right.
is in charge of this world, right? Like God, basically, when he cast Satan down, I think this was done on the fallen's own accord. They chose to fall. They knew what they were doing, coming down here, fucking earth women and animals. And some people could interpret that as like science experiments, because Inky, Nudamud, meaning the artful fashioner, that could be like, he was also known as the scientist. Who else do we know as the scientist? Yakub, right?
Shit. Yakub's in the mix, baby.
Inky is Yakub.
Oh, that's interesting.
Inky's origins being in South Africa, right? Eridu. There's a few ways that you could say it. Yeah, and creating different hybrids of people, right? Now, not to say that we all come from that. I would argue that not every race is the same, but we won't get into that.
I actually want to. So I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Where are you at on like pre-Adamite men? Or I don't know if you even call them men, but just pre-Adamites.
Well, I'm
asking the race question. What do you think about this?
To be honest with you, I have looked at it in a couple ways. And there's some descriptions of this in these stories. Some of these deities being when they incarnate, right? They incarnate in avatar bodies. Whether that's like scientifically made or biological, and there's like these regeneration chambers, which is a whole different rabbit hole when you talk about what's his name? Ningajita, Thoth, Hermes, and the halls of Amenti being under the pyramids and Sphinx and all that. That's a whole different place to go down. But there were humans already here when the Anunnaki arrived here, but they weren't the brightest, right?
Right. Something
They
closer
couldn't hold
to
tools.
No, I was just gonna say something closer to like what we might interpret as like a
Sorry.
something
Continue.
closer to what we might interpret as like a Neanderthal, right? When we're looking at evolutionary biology and they're showing us these representations of ancient man, very much the same physical descriptives as what the pre-Adamites would have been.
Yeah, dude. It actually says in these stories that there were 2 Adams. You know, now I don't know how true that would be because we were only told of 1 Adam in the Bible. But there was Adamu, who they kind of created and they let go. He was too much like them, it said. But then there was Adapa, who Adapa later became the husband of Lilith. Yeah, apparently Adapa was carrying some kind of DNA. I don't know if it was maybe from Enki or Ninma, who is, and you see, so you see this a lot too, man. Ninma being the sister of Enlil and Enki, they both had children with her.
Bro, can
Zeus
I
and
just say
Hera,
for a second?
right?
Like now that we're in 2025 and it's like I know we're in the middle of this thing where it's like they're banning porn from Florida or whatever the case may be, but it wasn't long ago, or maybe it still is, that the number one trending like porn search is incestual. It's stepsister. It's, you know what I mean? It's like I just find that everything echoes from those times.
This brings me to another point. These archetypes of these certain fallen deities, particularly Inanna, Ishtar, El, and then Marduk, Bel Marduk, they are reemerging. Like you have the spirit of Lilith reemerging through 4th wave feminism, right? You have all these wars happening right now. And it is, in my opinion, that the Jews do not, I'm sorry, well, I guess we're on Patreon now, that different sects of Jews worship these different deities.
Yeah,
For instance,
I would agree with that.
The Talmudic Jews straight up worship Bel Marduk. The priest of Babylon, it goes into the Rothschilds, meaning like Ra's shield, red shield. The other Jews worshiping El, right? They have the box on their head. Now they may both put boxes on their heads. I don't know. But yeah, man, like I said, when you kind of get into these entities, you have to take them one by one. But Lilith, you know, her basically being like an inbred baby. And apparently she was one of the first sirens.
Right.
Yeah, Enki being the god of the water, right? So like they had these aquatic kind of what would you call it? Aspects to them. Now, like I said, who knows? Who knows if this stuff was physical, if it was astral? I tend to kind of think it's both. For instance, there's some of these names that you see, especially emissaries from the creator that come down and tell them like, hey, shouldn't be doing this, or hey, you need, like, basically showing up in dreams, right? Not being there physically, but coming through what you would probably like what would be a portal, right? That's something else that I've been trying to dive further into recently, is the whole interdimensional aspect of it and relating it to these deities. Because like I said, there's the original story, and then you link in at all this other stuff, and you kind of find these little pieces along the way that make more and more sense. I still have, we've only dived into like 4 of these entities on our show. And I talk about them a bunch, but like, for instance, with certain sects of Hebrews worshiping, the main candle on the menorah is called the Shamash, relating directly to Shamsiel, another fallen angel. So like they're giving praise to each one by these certain signs and sigils and like naming certain things after them. It's very odd. It's like they're like, they're acting like they're there watching them or something. Like physically. Yeah, like on Yom Kippur, you leave the door open. They say it's for Elijah, but there's some theories it's for Azazel, right?
Right.
And that's where the sacrificing the chicken comes from and all that stuff.
It does seem like a lot of these entities, part of the trouble with tracking them down is they've taken on new attributes throughout time. And some of those attributes were some that came from others. Like when we're talking about Lilith, right? And you mentioned her being a siren rather. I always took siren to mean sort of an aquatic, like a mermaid type of character, but obviously a very negative one that lures men to their
Also
deaths
a
by
whore.
singing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there is this idea. So in Isaiah, Lilith is listed amongst other creatures in the deserts, including hyenas and goat demons. And then there is this idea that that Lilith is connected to the owl, which, you know, if you
A
do a little bit
harpy,
of
right?
a Google on that, you'll find that, right? The screech owl. But over time, it's like I've heard her associated with the siren, but then I've heard her described as something that is like a harpy, which is, you know, I guess there's precedent for these things hanging out by cliff sides by water. But that's a bird with tits, you know, like a bird lady with tits. And it just gets really confusing. And I wonder if it's because the answer is like yes to all of those things. Like these entities aren't just one thing. And over time, maybe they do adapt and change and take from one another. You know what I mean? Especially if you can look at Lucifer as both in some instances a male character and a female character.
Exactly.
Well, then there's a sort of transmutation that seems to take place because they're spiritual beings.
Well, and also you have to look at it. Where do shapeshifters come from? Right? Like
Uh,
where does that come from? It probably stems directly from these certain entities.
mm,
That being a gift of the fallen, right? What they would call a gift, not so much, right? I think it'd be terrifying to shed your skin and to change into some creature, and that goes into like the dog man, like the Dimu, what we were talking about, as well as the I had to write these names down: the Kusariku, the bull man, or the Minotaur.
interesting.
Yeah. The Idimu, the wind spirits, which are directly related to Lilith. It's like she had this dominion over what I guess you would say could be elementals of some sort.
Ah,
And the fallen, and my wife kind of has this theory that the fallen have manipulated the earth elementals, which God, the creator, created, right? If you get into the esoteric and stuff, and I've read a lot of Manly Palmer Hall. I don't agree with everything he talks about, but there are some things in there that are very interesting. As well as these dragons you see, horned dragons, lion-faced dragons. It also refers to them as storm demons. Fish monsters, Kalulu. Who does that sound like? Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Exactly. This all stems back to ancient Mesopotamia, these original names, and it's just like that with the deities.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Even when
But
it comes to this idea of minotaurs, right? It's like, well, you have a precedent for these angels having the face of a bull or an oxen in many cases, and then of course you have Molech, which at some point is depicted as a bull. Then all of a sudden seems to adopt the owl of Minerva, which is interesting because the owl is also associated with Lilith. There is a huge incestual crossover of the
UFOs.
symbolism that's associated with these
yes,
entities.
and this could all be symbolic, right? Like I don't know. I tend to think that there's something greater to it, but there's some people that look at it symbolically. Now, I have a theory that's where Mothman comes from, is Moloch. Yeah, if Moloch was a deity, a fallen angel, and he participated in the corruption of God's creation, then and when you look at Mothman, he is a harbinger of doom.
Right.
Right? Wherever he is, there's a catastrophe that happens directly after. There's something spiritual about that, right? Whether he's manipulating what's the ether around him, whether he can possess you, and kind of I don't know, man. There's a lot tied into that. That's why I
It could
dive
also
into
be like
cryptids a little bit.
a watcher thing, right? So like
Yes.
just the nature of being a watcher is that you are to observe these moments throughout humanity's development. I often look at like the Hat Man as seemingly he's some higher ranking entity. He's not a shadow person. Those seem to just be really low level kind of creatures, but the Hat Man seems to be a little bit of a bigger deal. And what does he do? Well, he almost exclusively just watches. He just watches. That's his fucking thing. It's like I'm frozen there, and this dude is
Never
just
thought about
watching me.
that.
And oftentimes, like Mothman is a harbinger of something to come. A lot of people associate him with a coming death in the family or something like that. And
Right.
there's a lot of stories where shortly after I saw him, my uncle died, somebody died, and I associate that with having this visitation. So I wonder if, because you have those two incursions, right? Or those two falls. You have the fall of Lucifer and his rebellion, but you also have the fall of the Watchers, right? Am I characterizing that the right way?
Yeah, you could look at them as both watchers, just different classes of angels. And that goes back to what I said with the seraphim, the fiery serpents, right? Inky representing the serpent, the Ophanum, which could be related to Anu,
Mm.
right? Like the head of all of them being one of, or maybe used to be one of God's highest angels, and then Inky's children and Enlil's children being the cherubim,
Mm.
also tying into the Ajiji, because when you read the Sumerian stories, it talks about the Ajiji descending to the Cedar Mountains. When you look up the Cedar Mountains, right there in Lebanon, exactly where Mount Hermon is, right? That's another similarity that I've found. But it's like what you said earlier. They do take on these titles. When when his kingship came into play. Now, this could be because he was Inky's firstborn. It could be because, of the signs in the sky. They kind of chose kingships by constellations, what was ruling at that time in the heavens. Everyone had a certain rank, like a rank of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whoever held the highest rank having 50, and everyone else, that archetype they carried, whether it be the god of the shepherds, god of agriculture, god of storms, it would all fall under this lead deity. In the last 2,000 years, that being Marduk.
Is this the same character as Zeus? Because I know that there's Zeus is the king of storms. He seems to be one of the bigger characters in the last 2,000 years. I know he's
Well-
also had dad from like Sumerian mythology.
Yeah. Okay. So you link that perfectly. Hadad, Baal Hadad,
Mhm.
or Zeus would be related to Enlil's oldest son, Ishkur, who, that directly ties into that. And like I said, there's some people that relate Enlil to Zeus. I relate him more to El. And I've talked about this before. Like, what's his name start with? An E. What's his name end with? An L.
Right.
Right? With etymology, we know you take certain letters out. You can either shorten it, sometimes make it longer, but it means the same thing. El is another one of those words that may also be a title. Like I said, there's many interpretations of that. But yeah, man, it's not like set in stone who is what now. It's just my research from what I've done. I've come to these conclusions, and I have talked to other people that will either be like, well, I kind of think this. For instance, I used to think Semyaza, who is just another Ajiji angel. Basically, when Marduk decided he wanted to go down to Earth, he was tired of living on Mars because his name, Marduk, Mars, right? He basically was up there by himself with all these other dudes, no women. They couldn't have children. All his cousins and siblings are down on Earth having all these kingships in the ancient world. And so he decides to basically be like, okay, fuck it. I'm going to go down there on my own accord and I'm going to take a wife for myself. And it's said in the story, in the Sumerian stories, that he chooses a daughter of Enoch. Yes. And this
Do
is
you
where
believe that that's the same Enoch?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know. Now, but this led to the rest of the angels falling. They attended his wedding. Basically followed him down there. There was really nothing anyone could do. And so everyone blames Marduk. And this is where you get Azazel being thrown into Dudael, or whatever it's called, Sheol, right? In the Sumerian stories, they tie Marduk up inside the Great Pyramid in this chamber, and there's like some sort of etheric wall around him to where he can't escape. One of his brothers has to go in there and kind of set him free. You see this a lot too in these stories. It's like they all hate each other, but they all love each other at the same time. Goes
Right.
back into the dualism of it. So you're like, is this just symbolic?
Well,
Right? Like,
it almost doesn't sound symbolic because that's indicative of human beings too, right? Many of us feel that way about our own families. And I'm telling you, Jules, I'm getting much more comfortable with the more research I do, coming to the conclusion that we can attribute a lot of our own behavior to these entities just because of the fractal nature of reality, the whole as above, so below thing. I think in many ways they are like us. Even the idea that like they fell because they wanted the veneration, they wanted the worship. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, that's a human quality. We fall victim to the same temptations in many ways. To me, I think that only strengthens the argument that they were real or are
yeah,
real.
dude. That's where we get these proclivities from.
Mm-hmm.
Incest and whatnot, because dude, they're very incestual. Like very like Anu has sex with his granddaughters. It's disgusting. But someone said right here, Yahweh was a storm god to the Canaanites.
Oh,
Yeah,
shout out Grapist
great.
349, which by the way, greatest name for a fan base ever. Dangerous Retards is a banger, but Grapist that's hilarious.
My wife.
Yeah, but Yahweh was a storm god to the Canaanites.
There's nothing she can really do about it. So she has to deal with it.
But, so do you think that falls into the same? I mean, you have all this precedent for all these storm gods, and they all seem to just be one link or another in the whole Zeus chain. But I'm also pretty open to the idea that these attributes and what they rule over seem to get passed like a baton.
It's an archetype. It's something that's carried around. Yeah. So, Bel was the storm god at once. And when I talk about Marduk so much, there's an episode of the Confessionals that I cannot fucking find to save my life. It's the episode where it's a guy, he's a pastor, and there is a young girl whose mother is putting her up for a sacrifice in a coven. And he plays the phone call on the episode where he's talking to this girl and she's crying, and yet this other voice comes out of it and starts to talk to him. I don't know if y'all know which one I'm talking about.
Actually doesn't sound familiar, and I've been watching him for a while. But
Yeah,
go on.
One of my favorite. When he's talking to the mother, she's like, there's nothing you can do to save her. Absolutely nothing. Her soul belongs to us, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then he goes, well, you don't think that I know about, he names a couple deities, and then he says Marduk. And she goes, you can't say that name. I heard that, and my fucking, like, I got chills all over my body, and I'm like, holy shit, there is something to that. Now, like I said, went by many names, but the story of him is the story of the adversary. But he chose to do the things he did, right? Like he had free will, just like all humans. And so you can't really, like, I don't know. I kind of got at first like listening to all the ancient alien stuff, and I do think to a point it is a deception. When you venerate these entities as you kind of look up to them in some way. It's like there's really no reason to look up to them, right? They all had this kind of fallen this fallen spirit that they all possessed. And you see that with them killing their own siblings. Which I don't think, I mean, that's probably one of the lowest forms of evil you could possibly go to, right?
Right. That's
Harming a
Abel.
child. Yeah. And killing someone who is part of your family, someone that you love, that you have, if anything, a soul tie to, right? Now, if an individual wants to break that soul tie, I guess that's on them. Because, you come from the same womb, the same maternal spirit. And when I say spirit, I just mean like we're all made of energy, right? And so, and that's another thing. When I looked at it, I'm like, okay, so let's say that our physical bodies were created. Now, just like humor me for a second. They were created by Enki and Thoth and Enki's sister Ninmah. That doesn't mean they created us. Our spirit, our eternal flame, what you would call in like the esoteric and stuff, comes from the creator.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point, actually. I love that, because even if through some series of events, it was exposed one way or another that they had a hand in it. And I don't think that's the case, but it is clear that like God is willing to allow major decisions to be influenced by a plethora of other entities, whether it's archangels or human beings, right? We've seen that, we've talked about it on the show, that humans can petition God and sway his decision one way or another. The idea that they would have had a hand, because it seems that God allows many different aspects of his own creation to have a hand in furthering it, does not mean that they created our eternal soul. And what are we at the end of the day? A fleshy vehicle or a soul?
Right. And there's something like when you mentioned the Shadow Man earlier, there's theories of that being like a remnant of our shadow selves being left here when we die. And this goes into like Credo Mutwa and some other stuff that a lot of people don't probably agree with, but there being like, we have two aspects to our soul. One being one kind of ascending to a higher plane, a heaven, you could call it, when we die. And then the other one kind of being stagnant here on earth as some kind of like residual energy or something.
Like an echo.
Yes. And people call this shit New Age, right, dude? Like, and I'm like, look, anything New Age had to stem from somewhere. All occultists do is take knowledge and subvert it, right? It's the same thing with numbers. A lot of these numbers, it's the intention on how you use it. We're taught to fear all of it, right? So we don't even question it. We don't look into it. We just stay ignorant of it. And people, they're scared of what they don't know, right? And this has to...
that, I look at that pretty often, because it's not lost on me that these things are seemingly effective and powerful. All these different systems, these teachings, whether it's numerology or astrology or what have you. And I do believe that these are just laws and sort of the fabric of the reality that we inhabit. And these are different ways to like manipulate it. But I don't think that these entities necessarily have the ability to commission these systems without being commissioned by God. I don't think that they can, through their own will, create something that didn't exist, but they can pervert it and
manipulate it.
Yeah. And I think that with Jesus, there were so many things that were accomplished by his coming and his death and his resurrection. And one of them was that these systems are real, but they've become so muddied. And I think there's no unpacking them. You know what I mean? So like, I always caution people against looking into these sort of things, but I think that if you were to, you would stand the best chance as a believer in Jesus Christ, because it just seems to me that genetically things got so muddled, system wise things got so muddled, and we were to the point where so much was corrupted that we needed a fix all solution. And I think Jesus Christ was that fix all solution. So what we're seeing now is like, yeah, these things are still out there. These systems weren't made to go away. We just needed something that can kind of part those waters, right? Because it was so dense and so murky, we just couldn't get through it. And so in very many ways, Jesus is a lifeline, right? It's like throwing a flotation device to a drowning person. But
He
that
saved my
ocean
life.
is still there.
Yeah, Christ saved my life. I would not be here. I wouldn't be talking to y'all right now if it wasn't for the Holy Spirit. And this is some other theory I have. When you look into the ancient past, you see a lot of rebirth symbolism, a lot of rebirth rituals taking place, even with the Anunnaki. Who was I talking about earlier? Enki's youngest, Dumuzi or Tammuz.
Did you say Lil Boozy?
Yes, Lil Muzi. He drowned. He was the first Anunnaki death on Earth.
He couldn't swim?
What's up?
I said he couldn't swim.
Okay, so
Didn't you say some of them were black from South Africa?
yes. And he may have been one of those. Inky side, right? Or maybe black, and Enlil's side may have been white.
Right.
Who knows? But he basically was framed for a crime against his sister, which was done. This was done by Marduk. Like he somehow used, and this is where I think they used to use magic as well. He somehow like infiltrated his dreams, got him drunk, and he ended up thinking that he sexually assaulted his sister. He goes on the run and pretty much like in like very much distress, I guess you could say, falls off a cliff and drowns.
Dang.
And yeah. And he was the lover of Inanna, his cousin, right? And which after that she goes crazy and she becomes this like sex goddess, having sex with men, looking for her lost lover. This is where the descent of Inanna and the Necronomicon comes from. Goes down to look for Dumuzi. That's also in Norse mythology, where the death of Balder comes from, right?
Yeah.
Odin's favorite and youngest son.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, with the one eye symbolism, you get that with Horus. And
that's interesting too, because I don't know if this is true. I'm just going off a Disney movie here. But like, you know, I don't imagine they fabricated this. This has to come from some sort of mythology. Hercules would have also delved into the underworld to rescue his love. You know, it was the same thing. He delves into the sort of this batch of souls that is in Hades and then rescues his that sort of thing. I was actually just talking about that because that's also on its face a very distilled version of the hero's journey, right? When you have Hercules and he leaves the safety of his home to pursue and find, you know, where it is that he fits in the world and ends up becoming a hero, is the fool. He is a goofy tard in the film. And then ends up, you know, fighting hydras, dragons, creatures, all these things, becomes the hero, delves into the underworld to get the treasure. The treasure is his love. He then has the opportunity to go elsewhere to Olympus, but decides not to and returns back home the hero with his new wife. But that element within mythology of delving into the underworld, of course, Jordan Peterson would reduce it to analogy, but
I was going to say,
I don't know. It just doesn't. To me, there's a real spiritual aspect to that.
Absolutely, but it also could kind of represent like the dark night of the soul, right? Like going through something very, very dark in order to get to this like place of enlightenment, right? Like I said, many ways to look at that. But Heracles is very closely related to Gilgamesh. With Gilgamesh going and trying to find the elixir of life, meeting Utnapishtim, Noah, and he like meets him. It's described like inside the earth. Honestly, that's how I interpret it. But what you had said earlier is like, yeah, dude, these angel, right? Angel means messenger in Greek. Basically came down to help us, to guide us, and they just took advantage of it. So when you do talk about like the fallen nature of these entities, absolutely, I think that is where we get all our proclivities from. But with the baptism stuff, so I'm sure you've heard about before Christ, or like with John the Baptist. There's some uh, aspects to it that talks about the first baptisms were basically like you were drowned, you died, and then you were resuscitated back to life.
That kind of a little bit in look, hear me out. Um, as far as the symbolism of being washed in of your sins and emerging anew in Christ, um, I have a lot of respect if you're that hardcore. If
Well,
you
that's
just
what
go,
they
if
did in,
2025, you're like, hold me under till I stop moving.
That's like a Game of Thrones thing. The Greyjoys would do that. I don't know if it was in the book or if it was in
You're
the
Yeah.
right, dude.
Yeah,
I
good
didn't even
call.
think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
But so when you look at Osiris and you look at Tammuz, because Osiris drowns too, right? You see all these rituals, drowning in water, can't be reborn, or they're reborn through, like Osiris is reborn through Horus, right? On the horizon, the Horus rising. Dude, it's like Christ came and basically said, like, hey, you don't have to die anymore. You can be reborn through me.
Yeah.
That's just one way to look at it.
I almost look at that like ancient man. I mean, we have it so good now that we have this clear, easy pathway. Ancient man was lost in the sauce, dude. It had to do some real harrowing shit to figure out anything spiritually. You know what I mean? They're sacrificing animals. God is speaking to them, telling them to sacrifice their firstborn, and then being like, "Okay, you're good. Don't do it. You can kill that goat over there." Like everything was a lot harder.
But they
You
probably
know,
had a lot more freedom than us. Like, I mean,
I would agree with that.
think
Yeah.
about the life of the ancient man. You know, Abraham was a rich man, but he lived in a tent and they just kind of moved around.
I
They
sometimes
lived,
long for that, dude. Like
yeah,
just to live in such simpler times.
Yeah.
yeah. Our
I
shit is
can't really
like,
explain it.
you know, most of us are stuck in a 9 to 5 weird hell trap to pay for pedophiles to continue to exist. Yeah,
Me, yeah.
it's
Debt slave.
Hey, listen, man. I mean, so in a way, like we do have it a lot easier where we could just be like, "Hey, Jesus, help us!" But like, I'm stuck at a desk. You know, I'm stuck at a cubicle. It's a
Yeah.
trade-off.
Well,
Stuck
I
stuck in
think
the
back in the
truck.
day too, it was a lot more obvious to them that they were in a spiritual realm, right? Given everything
Yeah.
that we've learned, it seems like the further back in time, whether or not you're taking the Ed Mabry POV, where it's like the speed of light is slowing down. It used to be faster, which means in a bunch of different ways that we were able to perceive things a lot more. We were hardier, we were more in tune with God, and we were more in tune with the spiritual realm. It would have been obvious back then. It's kind of it's really a challenge that we find ourselves in, where it's like, what if we stripped the spirituality from their lives, and whatever little notion there is left where you detect it, well, let's just inundate them with so much monotony and shit that they can't even see through it to notice it. Will they then still be able to discern that there is a spiritual realm? And then it's an uphill battle from there to decipher what we're talking about here on this show, which is like how many different entities that previously, um, I don't know how long ago I wouldn't have even really felt as though they were connected. I had my ideas, like I used to look at the concept of like the 13 crystal skulls and like what if they were associated with the Greek gods and all these different things. So I started to like piece some stuff together, but it was nowhere near what it is now. Only in recent years am I making these levels of connections. It's like, man,
Yeah.
even if you can detect that there's a spiritual realm, good luck parsing it out.
Yeah. And that's funny you say that about all the crystal skulls, because then you have the 12 lost tribes of Israel and the 13th one, right? And then the families of Atlantis as well, which predates ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt, is where these same beings were said to have been priests. So it's like, did they slowly fall over time living here on Earth?
Mm.
You know, they were subjected to this physical reality, which I mean, they more or less chose for themselves. But at the same time, man, I mean, there's many ways to look at it because we're told so many different things, and the truth is usually somewhere in the middle.
Right.
So, yeah, I just stay kind of researching. Dude, I don't really subscribe to any. I just know that I was saved by the Holy Spirit, and I continue to my life. Isn't what it used to be, man. Like I used to be a fucking train wreck, bro.
Mm.
Like I'm sure y'all may have been there yourselves, but there you like I said earlier, you can't really deny that. Regardless of what people tell you, like, oh, Jesus was a Jew, and it's like, who wasn't a Jew at that time, right?
Right.
Who was born like I don't know. There's a lot to get to with that, but
Well, Owen Benjamin has a
no-
great way of dispelling that, and this is in my. He probably doesn't think so, but I recognize it as just this simple brilliance that he had in this moment of asking a question. When people say like Jesus was a Jew, and so you're just falling for like more Jew psyops, it's like, well, what do we mean by that? Is Jesus out here advocating for predatory loans? Is he owning a pornography company? Is he convincing you to debase yourself morally? You know what I mean? It's like that's none of what Jesus Christ's message
That's
was. And so
usury.
what use
Right,
is it
right.
then to compare him to the modern day boogie Jew that rules your life in so many different ways? It's like it's not the same thing at all. So the language is stupid. It's a useless vocabulary word, and it's not at all applicable here. So yeah, I mean that's not the same thing. And something just popped into my head too. It's like, we were talking about the hero's journey, and obviously like Lord of the Rings is a great representation of this. So is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a good way of it. And at the end, what you notice about those two films is like, and even Hercules, when they get there, they turn it down. And why is that so important to note at the end of the hero's journey? It's like, once you get there, you have the ring. We'll cast the ring away. When you get there in Harry Potter, he has the Elder Wand. And what does he do? He snaps it in half and he tosses it off of a cliff. Hercules has the opportunity to join the Olympians, and instead he chooses a mortal life. Even though there's all this power at his fingertips, he chooses to die with this mortal woman. And it's like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If the angels couldn't handle it, what makes you think you can handle it? So really, the true romance at the end of the hero's journey is to get it, but cast it away, because it's not for you. Absolute power is for God. We're not designed to be able, not even angels are designed to be able to, outlast that sort of temptation.
Yeah, and when I mean that, who wasn't a Jew back then? I mean in that region where it said that Christ lived, like you
Right.
had Gentiles, but I mean the stories and the lineage he came from, I mean, undoubtedly was Jewish. Now, like I said, there's people that think that we've been lied to about that, and that he was a white European man. I don't know, right? I don't know, but that's the physical aspect of it, right? The real connection you'll get is the spiritual connection. That's just what I've encountered in my life, and
Right. It's the message.
something that I don't really question.
Mm-hmm. Well,
These
even
texts and stories have been not missed. They have been retranslated, reinterpreted through, and we have how many denominations of Christianity?
I don't know, but it's like thousands. Is it thousands,
Hundreds,
or am I tripping?
thousands. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so live in the spirit, right? Not in the flesh.
Right.
I guess you could say.
Look, we're at the hour and 50 mark. I think it's a good place to land it, but we tried to unpack something very difficult here, and this was a fantastic conversation. I know people are going to love this, but there's so much left on the table. We'd love to have you back in the future, because some of these ideas, once you lay out the foundational work for them, they deserve more zeroed in analysis. And I'm hoping that we could do some of that in the future. But this is a great way to introduce you to our audience, to the Dangerous Retards, which, by the way, there's a tremendous amount of overlap already. But if you can, Jules, just one more time, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Oh, guys. Twitter, Greypilled Pod. I'm on Instagram as well, but I don't use it too much.
Instagram
Message from
sucks.
Toad.
That's the wrong Instagram.
I'm on Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, also patreon.com/greypilledpodcast. I'm trying to get some merch put out soon. Working on that, some new logos and stuff. A lot of good stuff coming here in the future, guys. So yeah.
Very cool,
But
guys.
thank
Go
y'all
and
for
support.
having me on, dude.
No, of course. This should have happened before, but we just got caught up in so much momentum
Y'all are
and
busy.
stuff. It's
Y'all
you
are
lift
the
your head up.
busiest
It's been,
people I know out here.
yeah,
So
it's just not easy. But we're actually going to be doing a show in 2 hours with Paranoid. So small
that.
world, very
Saw that.
incestual, very Enkill, or Enlil. So, but guys, if you do enjoy what you heard here, go and support Jules over in the Greypilled podcast. If I'm not mistaken, we're actually releasing one of your episodes on our Sunday share this coming Sunday. So maybe you guys will enjoy that, and you now know where to find them. Thank you, Jules. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank y'all. Thank y'all again. Thank y'all. This y'all are a big influence in me podcasting, been watching y'all since I started, it's crazy how you can I don't know, you kind of get put into this world and all of a sudden you're doing stuff with people that you looked up to or that inspired you to do the same thing. So thank y'all, man.
Yeah, man. I feel the same exact way. That's happened to us a bunch of times already. But yeah, just keep going, and we're gonna have you back on. And you're already like linked in with everybody. So Jules is here to stay. Follow his show, and until next time, don't forget to obey, submit, and comply. See you later, guys.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. If you can persuade them that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, you got them. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of what's happening. And they have.